The most meaningful work we do in our lives is often the hardest. It's often the hardest. And we are called to do hard things because of the value and the meaning that it conveys and embeds in the lives of others. And we have lost that thread in our society. We think we can have impact by doing easy things.
You're listening to the Faith and Work Podcast, where we explore ways to serve God and others in our daily work to bring life and hope to workplaces and cities. Welcome to the Faith and Work Podcast. I'm your host, Joanna Meyer, a member of the Denver Institute staff and the Executive Director of Women, Work, and Calling. And we're joined today as our co-host with Ross Chapman, the Institute CEO. Hi, Ross.
Hey, Joanna. Great to join you today on the podcast.
Yeah, it's fun. I haven't been on with you in a while. We are in the middle of our Voices from the Workplace series, where we highlight leaders faithfully following Christ in their daily work. And today we turn our attention to one of the most formative sectors of all, education. One change that is broadly affecting education today is the rise of school choice. Here in our home state of Colorado, nearly 40% of public school students attend a school other than the one assigned to them by their home school district. It's a shift that reflects the rise of charter schools, magnet schools focused on bilingual education, the arts or technology, and private schools offering classical education. And it hints at a change in how parents engage their children's education. Instead of defaulting to sending our kids to the neighborhood school, we're now considering which educational model or learning environment best suits each child. It makes me think of Proverbs 22:6, which says that the faithful should start children off on the way they should go, and even when they're old, they won't turn from it. But it is complicated. Ross, I know that this shift to school choice has affected your family and neighborhood. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like on the ground in North Denver.
Yeah, it definitely is affecting the neighborhood. There's a lot of good that comes from having more options for education. It's kind of a market-driven reality, kind of how we think about picking a local congregation to be a part of. You can kind of pick the one you like, the one that you want to go to and feels good, versus like what it used to be in older days when it was, this is the church in the neighborhood, so we all go here. Used to be like when I grew up, this was the school in the neighborhood, so this is where I go. And today, 40% of students going to a place they wouldn't be assigned to go to from their neighborhood. So how that shows up on my street is that the kids that live on my street, very little overlap in their schools that they're attending. That means there are multiple buses who show up in the neighborhood and then go to different schools. So they have different bus stops, different times. So you see, 7, 8 different buses coming through, and they're picking up kids who go to different schools. And, they're just down the street from each other. And so what that does is it allows people the choice, which is great, but it also means that I'm not connecting with those parents at the bus stop. It means that my kids aren't spending time with the kids they live next to like they maybe did in the past. And I think there's something to lament about that. And there's also opportunity and a challenge where we may have to put a little more effort and intentionality into knowing our neighbors. And I think that could potentially be a good thing. But that's definitely how it shows up in our lives right now. And that's been interesting to navigate. And I'd say as your kids get older, there are less elementary, there's more elementary school options out there than there are middle school, and then less for high school. And so as that happens, as they age and grow through the system of education, they do get some more opportunity to kind of be in the same space. So my middle schooler is hanging out with kids from his elementary school. He went to 2 different ones, and he sees both groups show up at that school. So There's some good things going on there. But education is a really important conversation. This is the second episode in the Voices from the Workplace series on education. And it's a really, really fun conversation to have. And we have great guests.
Yeah, I'm excited for our listeners to meet our guests today.
Let's do that right now.
In today's conversation, we will explore 2 different approaches to education through the lives and work of Bill Kurtz, founder and former CEO of the Denver Schools of Science and Technology. It's a charter school network of 16 schools serving 7,500 students in the Denver metro area. And he now serves as a senior advisor to DSST and as a member of the board of directors at the National Alliance of Public Charter Schools. Our second guest, Hilary Oswald, is a grammar school principal at Augustine Classical Academy, which is a private Christian school serving serving students in preschool through 12th grade. And in addition to her educational leadership, she has worked as a magazine editor and author. It's important to note that in today's conversation, this will not be a debate about the benefits and drawbacks of school choice. Rather, we'll be focusing on how faith shapes the culture and systems these educators lead and how they serve students, teachers, and families with grace and conviction. So Hilary and Bill, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you guys on the podcast. It's always just a joy to interact with all of our guests. And we like to start the first question with just kind of a quick reflection on your own vocational journey. So Hilary, you can kick us off, and then Bill, you can go. But we'd love to hear just kind of how you got into the work that you were doing in education, because you neither one started there. So we'd love to hear that journey.
Yeah, I was an English major in undergrad. And when you're an English major, people always assume you're going to go into teaching. And so I aggressively refused to do that and went and got a master's degree in journalism and spent 18 years as a journalist and an editor. And I loved writing about education. I loved talking to teachers. I loved talking to kids. I loved thinking about systems. And so I spent a lot of time doing that in addition to some other content areas I covered. And at the same time, I was serving on the board of Augustine Classical Academy, which is where I work now. And I termed out of my board service, and the grammar school principal job opened. And our executive director called me and said, how about if you prayerfully consider doing this? And so the short answer is God and I agreed that this could be a good opportunity. And I've been at ACA in a staff role for 3 years.
That's awesome to hear. Quick follow-up, Hilary, before Bill, you share about your journey. But did it become obvious to you, or was it as you went in, that this work you were going to do in education was sort of like an opportunity to express who you are, but also see it as ministry? Sometimes we really struggle to see non-church, nonprofit, spiritual work as a certain kind of defined thing. Did you go in with a different mentality, or have you come to see that clearly?
Yes, I think because my own kids, I have 2 kids, they're both teenagers now, because they were both in school, they were at the school where I work, and I had seen the way it shaped them. I think education is discipleship in a lot of ways. And so I was pretty excited. ACA is a Christian school, and I had never worked in a Christian environment before. So yes, I did see it as a kind of ministry. And also it's been a real sort of sweet time in my professional life.
Very cool. All right, Bill, how about you? What's been your journey into education? And
Yeah, I mean, I
you
think
see it as ministry too?
I always loved working with kids, so I spent a lot of my high school and college summers leading wilderness trips and working at camps and things. And then out of college, I got great advice from my mentors that if you can get a job on Wall Street, that's a great place to learn as long as you're willing to get out. And, the golden handcuffs are real. So anyway, so I did go to Wall Street and enjoyed my time there. It was a great experience. I learned a lot, and I just felt called into this question of, I think I have something greater purpose in my life than being a banker. Not that being a banker is a bad thing, but I just felt this call to do something greater with my life. And I'd always been fascinated with the question of how governments, particularly governments of countries that are well-resourced and are filled with highly educated people, how governments can actually enact policies and create systems that do the opposite of what they're intended to do. And how do we end up in a world, and in New York City, it became very clear to me, how do we end up in a city, the capital of the world in so many ways, with almost 2/3 of children in low-income families not being able to read? Mm-hmm. And how do we have a system that in the most well-resourced city, in the most well-resourced country in the history of the world, we end up there? How do we have those kinds of systems? So it really fascinated me about how do we create these systems and how do we undo them, if you will. And so I put that interest in answering that question with my passion for kids, and I ended up going from Wall Street to the South Bronx. And I worked in a Catholic grammar school for about 4 years, really understanding what does it mean to be a child in a family in the poorest congressional district of the United States of America, and what does schooling look like in that scenario, and it became very clear to me that there was a huge leadership vacuum in education, and such an opportunity to answer this question of how do we create systems that actually hurt people, not help people. And then I went from the South Bronx to the heart of Newark, and Central Ward of Newark, where I ran a school for 6 years before coming to Denver. And education is such an honor because really in the end, it is a vocation that is about helping people become their best versions of themselves. Mm-hmm. Whether that is our young people, whether it's our teachers, our staff, our families, it is truly the center of what I would call human development in our society, and particularly with the decline of the church and other places where those tentacles of human community and development have unfortunately drawn back in our society. Schools have become asked to do even more, probably too much. Mm-hmm. But in the end, they've become the center of all human development, for better or worse. And so it's been an honor to spend my career helping people become the best versions of themselves.
So cool. We'll explore how you do that in just a moment, but I'd like to know more about the educational models that each of you have chosen to invest your time in your giftedness. Hilary, for listeners that might not be familiar with classical education, can you give us a little overview of its principles and pedagogy?
Yes. Classical education is both a pedagogy and a specific kind of content, I would say. So pedagogically, we spend a lot of time in what we call grammar school, which is the K-5 space, laying foundational knowledge down, making sure students know all the grammar of all the academic subjects. We think of grammar as being particularly language related, but there is a grammar to math. There is a grammar to history. There's a grammar to science and so forth. And so our students in grammar school do a lot of singing and chanting and memorization, and so that they can retain knowledge, because knowledge is essential for thinking. And then in the upper school, we move away into, always students are gaining knowledge, always they are learning. The way that they do that changes as they get older. And so in middle school and high school, which we call respectively logic school and rhetoric school, students learn to defend their ideas. There's a lot of Socratic dialogue. There's a lot of emphasis on original texts. We use textbooks as rarely as possible. Predominantly in math and science, we use textbooks. In the humanities and language, we use great books, which gets into the content area of classical education. Our students study Latin starting in 3rd grade. That's their primary foreign language. And there's sort of a traditional nature to classical education. It's a little bit old school in all the best ways. And because we are a classical Christian school, we also get to point kids over and over to the centrality of the Lord. God is the author of all there is to know. And it's really fun to say, math makes sense because God is a God of order, not a God of chaos. And so God is sort of the central organizing principle of what we do and what we learn is a big part of classical Christian education.
Okay, if we were to spend an afternoon walking the halls at Augustine Classical with you, what would we see and notice about the culture of learning at the school?
If you walked with me down the grammar school hallways and peeked in classrooms, you'd see kids in uniforms. You'd see them singing or marching around chanting math facts. You'd see them working on their little whiteboards, diagramming sentences, those kinds of things. You'd see pretty orderly classrooms. Teachers lead the classrooms in a classical model as opposed to maybe more of a child-led environment. And then in upper school, you'd see kids around a table maybe debating the virtues or lack thereof of Tom Sawyer, or in physics class, they're maybe making rockets to study wind shear and velocity and those kinds of things. So a whole variety of things. I'd say the central thing is teacher-led classrooms, small classrooms. I think a lot of joy, a lot of excitement, a lot of work, certainly, but a lot of joy in that mix.
Okay, Bill, we'd love to hear a little bit about, you actually got to build DSST kind of from the ground up. You had a vision, you got to think about the systems and what you wanted that to look like. Just help us understand how the mission of the school connected with your faith and maybe even some principles and truths about the Christian faith, like human dignity, justice, formation of people, kind of influenced what actually became this vision that you were hoping would happen in a public school setting?
Yeah, so when I came to Denver to start the SST in 2004, there was a palpable sense in the city, and I think this is unfortunately more true today than it was in 2004, that what you look like, the income your parents had, the ethnicity of your family determined your educational outcomes. How do I know that? Because when I came to town to describe DSST, which was going to be a diverse school that committed to send every single child to have the opportunity to go to college, the first question people asked me, well, who's going to be in your school? Which was code for who are you going to be serving? And this idea that you could literally have 100% college acceptance was only possible if you're serving a white, middle, or upper class suburban population. And that is the embedded, I think, belief, unfortunately, that still exists in this country today, and is frankly getting worse, is this idea that human dignity and human capacity and human flourishing is only possible for certain people. And so we were going to create a school that changed that. And we had an unfailing belief that every single child that walked through our doors had the capacity to accomplish great things in high school and to earn the opportunity to go to college. That was really the underpinning, I think, was a deep, deep belief in the human dignity of everybody. And everybody has that same capacity, that God-given capacity. And so, so that's what we set out to do. And I think, 22 years later, we have a system of, as you said, 16 schools, Joanne, I think in the intro, that, all of our children have the opportunity to go to college every year. And, we serve an incredibly diverse population from lots of different communities in Denver, recent immigrants to Denverites that have been here for a long time, low income to high income families. And the commonality of all that is that we believe that all children have this capacity, and the adults are actually the problem, not the kids. Based on that, I think the one thing I would say, we built a model around that mission of all children really can accomplish amazing things. We had 6 core values that guided the way we work and learn and exist together every day. And then we had this thing called the human condition, which is something that we believed really undergirded the whole community, which is this idea that in order to have a community of people who are growing to become their best selves, you have to have some notion of what people are doing in this world. And as you know, we often leave that question to philosophy departments with professors surrounded by books, or maybe seminary. But boy, if we're in the work of developing people every day, we ought to have a view of what people are doing in this world. And our view is really simple. And it was really the heartbeat of the organization, which is that everybody desires to wake up in the morning and be affirmed for the unique gifts and talents they have. And everybody desires to make a positive contribution to this thing called the human story we're a part of. And that is an incredibly resonant idea. And, as you can imagine, it has real power in a setting that you could find the origin of that view of the human condition in certainly the Christian faith on some level. But it has real resonance, I think, just as a human concept, which I think doesn't surprise any of us in this conversation. That was the animating concept that I think has really built the kind of culture that thousands of educators all over the world came to come see, which is this idea that, wow, DSST has this culture where every student feels like they are loved and feels like they are valued for who they are. And there is a vision of what they can accomplish in the world that is big, and that they are on the path to embodying that vision and making that contribution to this thing called the human story that we're all a part of. And I think in many ways that was the animating part of our culture that was transformative, that I think had people walking into our schools and saying something is very different about these kinds of schools, and this culture is very powerful in ways that we never imagined a public school being.
That's really fun to hear, Bill. There's so many things we could point out. I was just thinking about, yes, God created everybody with dignity, asked us to join him in his work in the world, and gave us gifts to do that. And so I love that resonates so much with every person, really. Like, I think that's something every person wants to believe. And so that is cool to see how that's worked out. Could you give us one or two examples of how you got staff, administrators, parents to sort of buy into that? And practically, what did that mean? Did that mean kids got a hug when they walked in the building? Did it mean every teacher got screened for, hey, do you really believe this or not? Like, how did you do it? Give us just a couple things that were practical there.
Yeah, I think oftentimes, and we've shared and taught this to thousands of educators in the last 20 years, but oftentimes educators always start with, well, this is what we're going to do with the kids. This is how we're going to create a culture for the kids. And we always started with our adults. You can't have a powerful school culture in a school where you're just focused on student behavior as opposed to adults embodying it. And so I think to your question, Ross, the first thing we always did was build that culture with the staff team in 1 school, 2 schools, 6 schools, 12 schools, 16 schools, because as you know, kids are smarter than we are, and they figure out exactly what is authentic and what is not. And we had really high expectations for them and for ourselves. And so we spent a lot of time, what does it mean to live our values as adults? What does it mean? I mean, we every staff had a core value commitment that essentially said, these are our 6 core values, and these are our commitments that we would make in front of our students. And so, yes, there was a tremendous amount of what I would say culture building with our adults, such that we were authentically leading this kind of culture in our own adult staff community before we ever asked our students to join us. That was number one. Number two, an embodiment of this, which I think is very, very powerful, is, we started every day with a morning meeting. And that meant the whole school was together, generally 2 days a week, and then we'd have grade levels together other 2 days a week. We started as a community, and we reinforced the fact that we are building a community together, and essentially the message was that your individual success does not trump the community's well-being and success, and actually you are as responsible for your neighbor's success as your own. And we are in this together, and we collectively live this culture together, and we reinforce that culture every day. I can't imagine running a school without doing that, because we built this idea of community. And one of the things I always love to say about our morning meetings is kids would come, they were not assigned seats, but they would come and they would actually claim their carpet spot, their place in the circle, and they would come to that spot every day. Why? Because it really was their signifying home to them and their place in this community. So that was a way in which, we lived out that view of the human condition, because kids felt like, hey, I have a role in this community, I have a home in this community, and symbolically, where they sat or stood in morning meeting every day was really this personification of, I think, the human condition played out.
We do something really similar, Bill, and I totally agree with you that culture building as a community goes so far in shaping kids and helping them understand what it is to be a human being in the context of other human beings, which is how God made us,
And our best schools out there have a vision big enough to create a countercultural culture where young people thrive, because they come to see the power of community. They come to see the power of values. They come to see that this lie of my success is the only thing I'm working towards versus, wow, what a powerful moment to understand that I can help my neighbor be as successful as I am. So I actually think that is the crux of great schools. And that's been true throughout thousands of years of history. And we just generally don't have visions big enough to create that countercultural space for young people to thrive.
Hi, I'm Ross Chapman, CEO at Denver Institute for Faith and Work. We want to see a future where every person's work brings hope and life to their city, which is a contrast with society's views of work, and for now, it's often a contrast with the views of work we hear at church. That's why I'm excited to share with you that we are currently in the midst of our FOR campaign. That's the FOR campaign, meaning this is a vision for the future of work, workers, church, and cities. Like you, we've noticed a lack of accessible, biblically grounded, and excellent vocational discipleship opportunities. This gap is causing many to have an anemic or a lifeless vision of their work. Vocational discipleship can come from many places in your life, such as this podcast. And as we seek to expand those opportunities with high quality content over the next 5 years, our aim is to help 100,000 people recognize and affirm their daily work is central to joining God in his vision and work to make all things new. If you've been encouraged and discipled by thoughtful conversations that you hear on the Faith and Work podcast, or if your life has been shaped by Denver Institute in some way, I encourage you to help advance this mission through the way you work and by giving. Will you consider a one-time, quarterly, or monthly gift to support this work? If so, visit the Give page at denverinstitute.org to get started. I love that analysis, and I love the drive for bigger vision. I think, our visions are often smaller than what God might invite us into. So Hilary, as you're thinking about that vision and helping your teachers actually live out that vision, you're leading this team, like, what are you doing for your educators to grow in buying into a vision and also being excellent in their job as teachers?
Yeah, I think I 100% agree with Bill that the grown-ups have to have the vision, build the vision, believe the vision in order to create a school that is effective in shaping the hearts and minds of kids. Kids are so smart, and they know when you are telling the truth and being genuine, and they know when you are unsure or when you are faking it or phoning it in. I think they deserve the dignity of the adults moving in the same direction. And so for my team, I have 17 teachers on my team, and we do some of the traditional things like professional development. We spend a lot of time talking about what makes a classical classroom and what doesn't. We do a lot of work together in our own sort of practice of Socratic dialogue. I spend a lot of time one-on-one with my teachers, and I often say there's not much economy of scale in education. Because education is relational, I have to support each one of my teachers individually in addition to supporting my team collectively. Teachers have to support kids individually in addition to collectively. And so I spend a lot of time one-on-one with teachers. Sometimes we're talking about pedagogy. Sometimes we're talking about discipline. Sometimes we're talking about things that are hard in their own lives. And I do sort of this combination of mentorship and leadership, which is typical in elementary schools. I have a lot of young women teachers who are single or newly married or new moms. And so we're talking about their faith journeys in addition to the math curriculum. We read books together every year as a team. We read a book and we discuss it every month in our teacher in-service. We play together. I try really hard to do fun things with them. I think teaching is hard. And so having time to be silly together. We have a little bit of a practical joke thing going on at our school, which it's harmless and a great culture builder. It's a great fun thing to do when you can laugh with your colleagues. So I think, I always advocate for money for professional development. If a teacher wants to grow in an area, we find a resource for them. I want them to feel like they can come to me with anything they need so that in the classroom they are well equipped and they can focus on teaching and loving kids.
Love it. I wish I had been a teacher under your care. I think I would have flourished.
Joanna.
Bill, I wanted to ask about a fellowship program that you've started for Christians working in education with Irvin Scott, who was a guest on the previous episode of the podcast. What needs are you hoping to address in educators' lives through the fellowship? And tell us about how the fellowship's structured to do that.
Yeah, I think over the last 20 years being in public education leadership, one of the things that became clear to me was the fact that many, many educational leaders could not bring maybe the most important identity marker of their life into their leadership. And of course, we are in a public setting and all the things, but as we know, many people would say their faith, whatever faith they have, is their most important identity marker. And for so many of us from so many different communities and backgrounds and experiences found that was the hardest part of you to bring into public education leadership. And so I've been a part of something called the Redemptive Leadership Project, which is a way in which we want educators, and they do come from public and Christian and all sorts of educational settings, but a way in which we can support educators leading what I would call faith forward with that identity marker in their organizations and in their leadership. And what we found is that, one, people are really hungry for this. Two, there is a common sense, particularly with public educators, that has been hard to integrate. And three, they don't know how to. And frankly, there's, this is the work that you all do here at the the Denver Institute of Faith and Work. But as you know, integrating faith into vocation is much more complicated and complex than often we realize. And so people have a really hard time pulling this really important part of who they are in their own personal and private life and integrating it into a public way into their leadership, particularly when it involves public schools. And so it's been a wonderful journey of leading this effort together, creating space for experiences for Christian leaders in education. And we just started this past year a fellowship program where over 3 meetings we focus on Christian leaders encountering their faith in a new way, learning about formation of their faith, and then integrating their faith into their leadership. We've had a great response. We've had 2 applications for every spot we had, and I think it's been a really powerful experience, and we think that this could actually transform education. Clearly, education in this country is not working. I could give you 7,000 statistics on how it's not working right now. We must change, and I think we have to think about how we bring a different lens to education. And I think one of those is enabling our leaders to bring their full selves to the work and to creating communities and schools and cultures that embrace people's full selves as opposed to part of them.
That's awesome, Bill. I'm glad to hear you doing that. And that's sort of like applying a theology for work to educators. And I have to tell you, I'm really thrilled to learn more about it, and I would like to talk more. Well, so thanks for sharing. And if you're an educator who wants to figure that out, you better sign up. Just as we're starting to kind of close down the conversation, I'd love to get both of you guys just like what excites you right now about education. When you think about education in the U.S. or even in just your own context, where do you feel enthusiasm and excitement? What gives you some hope? Hilary, you can kick us off.
I think, I work in a context that is smaller than Bill's context. And I am always encouraged by interacting with parents. We have parents who are professing Christians. We have parents who are not. We have parents who have a lot of financial resources. We have parents who absolutely do not. And parents make me hopeful. I think they care so deeply and they want the best things for their kids. So programs like private schools, charter schools, Choice for Parents is, I think, hugely important, hugely hopeful. And teachers make me hopeful. Teachers in every context, teachers who show up in a hard job every day to love kids, to teach kids. Kids bring their full selves to school for the most part, for good or for ill. Whatever's going on, kids show up and teachers meet them in all the things. They meet them when they're hungry. They meet them when they're excited. They meet them when their tooth is loose. They meet them when their parents are divorcing. Teachers are a national treasure. And anytime I meet a teacher, I'm encouraged. I'm hopeful. I think there's definitely work to be done, to Bill's point, about literacy and numeracy in this country, and a real sense of having a clear path forward for kids to grow up and be the fullness of themselves in professional settings and in personal settings. And also, teaching is a hard job, and that people respond to that and do it is deeply hopeful to me.
Awesome, Hilary. Thanks. Hey, Bill, what about you? What excites you about the future of education?
Yeah, I think, in great volatility is great opportunity. And I think that God works in places and moments and spaces when we are probably beset the most by chaos. And I think we do have a chaotic time right now. I think it's hard to be a child in this country. And so in that, I think there's great opportunity. And I think that, I would say what gives me great hope, one is the resiliency of children and the fact that they are resilient beyond measure. And as adults, if we just give them a picture, a vision of the belief that we have in them, they can do amazing things. And so that is the first thing I'm hopeful. I think a tangential thing that I think is very, very hopeful is I think we are coming to a reckoning around what I would call human-centered education versus technology-centered education. And you might say, well, what do you mean, Bill? Because it seems like technology and AI and everything is winning. But I actually think we're much wiser today about the importance of relationships and human connection than we were 15 years ago. And I think in some ways, while there is a long way to go, I think the conversation is quite different. 15 years ago, every educator, every student, every parent, largely, I'm not saying every, but you know what I'm saying, the vast majority of people basically said we should get smartphones in the hands of every single kid because they are going to transform learning, they're going to transform their social life, they're going to transform our connection. And we've learned the hard way that that is not true. And maybe in that learning, we're now prepared around AI in a different way. And I get there are huge challenges with AI and relationships with bots and all the rest of it. But I do think there's a growing understanding of that incredible capacity of young people and the incredible importance of developing the relationships and connections in their lives to help them thrive. And so I do think if we did not have this last 15 years, the AI kind of revolution would completely have swallowed us up at this point, and we would be in a much worse spot. I think parents, to Hilary's point, and other folks are now saying, hey, we've got to look at this with eyes wide open. We've got to understand what our children are doing. We have to understand AI in a different way. And kids are receptive to that because they have experienced the challenges of technology now in an experiential way, which I think is now helping them come alongside us as adults and say, hey, we've got to create a different kind of culture and society here that's not just all centered on technology.
Yeah, I would say my bigger answer for sort of a societal hope in education is that there is a broader conversation about education. And there's lots of voices, people like Bill, parents, some politicians, nonprofit organizations. I think I see us taking more seriously, maybe since the pandemic, but to Bill's point, maybe even pre-pandemic, taking more seriously the nature of education, the effect of education, and the responsibility of education, and therefore the power of truly good, objectively good education. And so I think greater attentiveness to how we are teaching our kids and what we are teaching our kids makes me hopeful.
Okay, I have a final question for you. And I invite you to offer a word of encouragement to someone who is working in education and listening to this episode and maybe fatigued or discouraged. This episode airs right after Thanksgiving, and it's that crawling into Christmas break sense of fatigue of the fall semester. So I'm just wondering how you would encourage an educator that maybe is just tired of working in education right now.
First, I would say teaching is an act of self-sacrifice, and it points us to Christ. That kind of laying oneself down for the good of the other is a really beautiful and hard following of Jesus. So I would say good job. Good job, you educator who's done hard work and is tired because of it. Your Lord is honored. You point us to Christ in that. Second, maybe this is an encouragement, maybe this is advice, but take your PTO. I've told my staff this for any time I've been in leadership. It's so hard to get a sub. It's exhausting to write your lesson plans in a way that a stranger can come and pick them up and lead your class forward while you take a day. But there's no prize at the end of the year for not having taken a day off here and there when you need it. So maybe a little bit of encouragement and also a little bit of advice.
I would say, number one, you are doing the most important job in society. So thank you for doing that. And we don't always value what you do in the way we should. but your children will for decades and for lifetimes and for generations. And so know that your impact is going to be felt for generations. The second thing I would say, and I think this is a lost art in our society, the most meaningful work we do in our lives is often the hardest.
Absolutely.
It's often the hardest. And we are called to do hard things because of the value and the meaning that it conveys and embeds in the lives of others. And we have lost that thread in our society. We think we can have impact by doing easy things. We think we can make a difference by just posting on social media something really catchy. And in fact, the greatest contribution you make with your life is by doing those things that are hardest on behalf of others, which is another way of describing the act of teaching in a simple sentence. And so my encouragement to you is you will look back on your life and say, that was a wonderful, difficult, challenging time, but it was all worth it because of the meaning that you conveyed and imbued and helped other people find in their own lives. So I would encourage you to keep doing it. And this is one of those places where as a teacher, you should live a countercultural life. Denver particularly tells you go spend time in the mountains and take Fridays and Mondays off to ski. And I'm telling you, Fridays and Mondays are the time that you make the biggest impact in the lives of children, the day before and the day after a weekend, many of which are going home to challenging situations. And your presence and your love and your continuous commitment to their well-being on Mondays and Fridays will make all the difference in the world, as opposed to those folks who see life about getting to Fridays and Mondays to ski. And so I encourage you to take heart in that, and I'm so grateful for their commitment to our children.
Preach it, Bill.
Yeah, so good.
Mic drop. Yep. Well, a big thank you to both of you, both for your years of service, your passion for teachers, and your deep love for students. We're grateful to learn from you today.
Thanks for having me.
Ross and I agreed that we could listen to Bill and Hilary all day. It's intriguing to think about the life of an individual educator and also the systems they lead. As a call to action from today's conversation, I encourage you to look more deeply at the schools within your own community. I wonder how well you know which schools are serving your neighborhood or which are the primary issues at your local school board. What might be one step you could take to really think more deeply about the educational needs in your community? Even if you don't have kids that are in the school system, you can still be a concerned neighbor and citizen by knowing your schools. And also, I'm wondering who you know who's a teacher or educational administrator, and how could you specifically encourage them through showing a curiosity about their work or offering a word of thanks or prayer for them in the work that they're doing today?
Yeah, I would just add, if you can't think of an education-related takeaway, then think about the challenge at the end of just doing hard work is usually required for the most meaningful work we do in our lives. So, yeah, if you're in a challenging moment, lean in and recognize it as, hey, what's God asking me here to do? And we encourage you to do that faithfully. And we're excited about your work and so glad to continue dialoguing with you on different industries. Thanks for joining.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Faith and Work podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. The Faith and Work podcast is produced by Denver Institute. We believe that when Christians work faithfully, the world will taste the hope and life that Jesus provides. To learn more or to make a financial contribution, visit denverinstitute.org.